The Kingdom of Ikana has always stood out to me as a very dark area in Majora's Mask. And given that Majora's Mask is already extremely dark, that is quite an achievement. But what actually happened here? One would assume that Skull Kid came along and ruined everything, but I want to propose an idea that Skull Kid actually had a minimal effect on the Kingdom of Ikana, and the real truth is actually much darker. Hey there friendos, Newbornkilik here, welcome you back to another awesome Zelda theory crafting-ish kind of video. Today we're going to be talking about the Kingdom of Ikana. Now, to understand what's happening at the Kingdom of Ikana now, we actually need to look at the history of the Kingdom of Ikana. Take a shot every time I say Kingdom of Ikana or Ikana Kingdom. I don't, actually. That's a terrible idea. The Kingdom of Ikana was a once thriving, albeit very militant and war-hungry kingdom. During their inevitable demise, it was assumed that they were at war with the Garo ninja. Now, this was a war of assumedly great intensity that neither side really gave up on. There have been speculations that maybe this wasn't even a war for like land or anything. Just towards the end, maybe it was just pure bloodshed. Someone to take your violence out on at some point. Why else would, even in death, these guys still want to fight this war? While we don't know a whole lot about the war, we know that Captain Kida and his platoon were killed during the war at some point, quote-unquote, on my own soil, on his own soil. There was a turning point. Something happened at some point, led to all of this. Now, it's very interesting to look around the Kingdom of Ikana nowadays. We'll get back to the history in a little bit. Nothing's like destroyed, okay? So what in the world could have possibly happened to this place? It doesn't really look like anyone raided this area. Even some of the smaller houses are intact. You'd think there'd be a bit more destruction if that were the case. We'll get back to that in just a minute, but let's continue along our timeline here of the Ikana Kingdom. I promise it'll all make sense in just a little bit. Many years pass. Pamela and her father move in to study the Gibdo and other supernatural events in the area. Pamela's father creates the song Goodbye to Gibdos, which is the song that plays when the water's running, which actually helps to repel Gibdo. Now we're finally up to current day, and this is when Skull Kid drops in. A lot of people actually kind of assume that Ikana Kingdom was ruined by Skull Kid in the first place, but I don't think that's the case. This is when Skull Kid comes in, basically right before Link gets there. At some point, it seems like Skull Kid kind of corrupted Sharp, one of the composer brothers for the royal family, counterpart to Flat, of course, into trapping his brother in their grave. And at that point, it seems like he attempted to revive the royal family by whatever means necessary. Skull Kid at that point will go off to the Stone Tower Temple and make sure that the fourth giant's soul is safely tucked away within Twin Mold's mind, while Sharp is drying up the well in order to essentially drive these two last living beings out of here, making it a true land of the dead. I would assume at some point Pamela's father didn't quite take the hint, went to the spring to see what was going on with the water, and got cursed and turned into part of a Gibdo, leaving Ikana Kingdom in the state that we see it in today. On a side note, I dread to think what would have happened to Pamela if Link hadn't intervened at just the right time. She would have either been consumed by her own father or forced to retreat through the treacherous wasteland that is Ikana Kingdom. Now that we're finally done with the history lesson, we can move on. So what actually destroyed Ikana Kingdom in the first place? Could the war between the two nations really have been bad enough to completely wipe out both sides? I don't think so. I think the answer genuinely lies in the Stone Tower Temple. Before we really think about that, I suppose we should actually rule out the idea that it wasn't Skull Kid in the first place that cursed them originally. First off, the timelines just don't really match up. In addition to that, Skull Kid's relation to the events in Ikana Kingdom seems shrouded in mystery. No one really mentions Skull Kid except for Sharp, the guy that so graciously allows you to join the ranks of the dead. Thank you. I've never been really invited to too many things, so that's very nice. I'll pass. Flat says, "Oh, Sharp, my dear brother, he sold his soul to the devil and was the one that locked me in here." Again, not really mentioning Skull Kid, just kind of referencing him as the devil. There's a good potential that he never even saw Skull Kid. The Igus du Ikana, or the King of Ikana, just says, "Someone opened the door and allowed the dark wind to blow." But after you play the Song of Storms for Sharp, he says, "We dead should not be lingering here in this land. It was all a trick of the masked one who had upset things." The fact that Sharp is the only one that mentions Skull Kid even wearing a mask at all kind of implies that maybe he met him at some point, or at minimum knows of Skull Kid's existence. There is another person who may be responsible for many of the evil doings in the area. especially in the past. I believe the person who originally opened the doors to the Stone Tower Temple were none other than the Garo Master. The fact that we find the Garo Master inside the Stone Tower Temple should be more than enough proof of that. It's also very possible that the doors of the Stone Tower Temple were never properly closed, and Skull Kid could basically just walk in and do whatever he wanted. Now, we already know why Skull Kid would want to open these doors, but what would lead the Garo Master to even think to use this place? That could be a little bit of a complicated question, but the King of Ikana does state, Stone Tower Temple is an impenetrable stronghold. Hundreds of soldiers from my kingdom would not even be able to topple it. Now, hundreds of his soldiers may very well have a hard time getting there, but maybe someone a bit more dexterous would have an easier time. But again, why go through all this trouble in the first place? Well, the Stone Tower Temple is something of a mystery even to the residents of Akana. People really only mention it in passing, or as the king puts it, where the winds of darkness blow through. Given that Ikana Kingdom was a very militant kind of country, you would think they would have at least looked into this, and the fact that the king doesn't really have any intel on this really speaks volumes to how mysterious this location is. It's possible that the Garo ninja clan may have just assumed it was an abandoned area, and very well may have seen the great tactical advantage that such a place might have held. It may also be that the Garo ninja knew that it was hiding a treasure that could turn the tide of the war, the light arrows. But this is really only supported by the fact that the Garo Master is the one guarding them, and the fact that the King of Ikana and his lackeys have a severe weakness to light. It's pretty unlikely that they had this weakness before they died, but it's pretty hard to tell. So now we have a pretty good idea of why the Garo would want to open these doors and get this tactically advantageous location, but what exactly is the curse that was put on Ikana Canyon? Well, I believe there were actually two separate curses. The one that happened when the Garo leader opened the doors originally, and the curse that Skull Kid set upon the land, causing the dead to rise again. It's very possible that one of the mini-bosses of the Stone Tower Temple, Gomes, was responsible for the first curse, as he does kind of resemble the Grim Reaper, which could be interesting to think about, but there's very little evidence for this. If Gomes was responsible, I believe that the curse would have been something along the lines of infertility on both kingdoms, or maybe even pestilence. The actual castle and housing all around Akana all seem to be in pretty good shape, so I doubt that anyone rained hellfire down upon them or anything. No, I think the death of the Grand Ikana Kingdom was actually much slower and much more painful than one might think. Onto the current curse, I originally had a feeling that Sharp was somehow almost solely responsible for raising the dead. Given that he did have visions of reviving the royal family, he even says as much after you play the Song of Storms for him. This only makes a little bit of sense, given he also states that the source of the curse is actually in the Stone Tower Temple. However, I suppose it's very possible that Ikana Kingdom might have been screwed enough to begin with that Skull Kid didn't really need to do too much. He just needed to basically walk in, corrupt one random, spirit who would then mess up everything else, walk into the Stone Tower Temple and be like, hey, hold this, Twin Mold, alright? Don't you forget about this, you do? I'll clip your toenails, alright? Look, for a centipede monster, that's probably a really big threat. But with that, thank you everyone for making it to the end of the video. It does help me out an awful lot. If you're interested in more videos like this one, check out the one on screen, as it takes an even deeper look into one of the most depressing parts of Ikana Canyon. Thank you so much to my patrons, channel members, and Twitch supporters as well. Anyway, I'm Newbornkilik, and I will see you in the next one. I'm out.